Today we will learn how to factor trinomials and quadratic equations. Trinomials can be expressed in multiple forms. The first form we're going to look at is x squared plus bx plus c. In order to factor a polynomial, first we must find two integers, m and n, whose product is c and whose sum is b. This is summarized below. Let's see how these rules apply to a few examples that we have on the right. Our first example, we have x squared minus 9x plus 14. And they want us to factor this polynomial into its two factors. So in our definition, we see that we have an x and an x as the first two letters, so we'll do the same. Now we have to find two integers when multiplied together will equal 14, but when added together will equal negative 9. So there's only two cases where we can multiply and equal 14, and that is 14 times 1 and 7 times 2. We know that 14 plus 1 won't give us a negative 9, so our two integers must be a 7 and a 2. Now we must decide whether our signs are going to be positive or negative in our parentheses. So since our 14 is a positive, that means both our integers are going to have a positive sign or a negative sign. If we assign a positive sign, we'll have 7 plus 2, which will give us a 9. We have to notice that our 9 is a negative 9. So that must mean that our two integers must be negative. So x minus 7 times x minus 2, when multiplied together, will give us x squared minus 9x plus 14. In our second example problem, we have x squared minus 3x minus 54. So once again, let's write our two brackets, and our first two letters are going to be our x in both brackets. So now we have to find two integers when multiplied together will give us a negative 54, but when added together will give us a negative 3. So we know that 9 times 6 is 54, and then since our 54 has a negative value, one of our numbers is going to be a negative and one's going to be a positive. So now we have to decide which sign to give inside our parentheses, where when added together we'll get a negative 3. So if we assign a positive sign here and a negative sign here, will give us a positive 3. So that must mean that our 9 has to be negative and our 6 must be positive. So if we wanted to multiply these together, we would see that we would get x squared minus 3x minus 54. Another trinomial that we may run into may be expressed as a quadratic equation. Quadratic equations are written as ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a, b, and c have to be real numbers and a doesn't equal 0. So let's see how one might solve a quadratic equation by factoring. First, it's typical that we're going to get our equation so that all our terms are on one side and they are equal to 0. We're then going to factor the expression, then set each factor equal to 0 and solve for the variable. Then we can plug our variables into the original equation to see if it makes a statement true. So we have an example problem on the right where we have ax squared plus 3 equals negative 14x. So first we're going to want to write the equation so we have all terms on one side that equals 0. So we can add 14x to both sides. So our first two integers within both our parentheses, when multiplied together, are going to have to equal 8x squared. So let's try 4 times 2. So we'll see that 4x times 2x will give us 8x squared. Now when we multiply these together, we're going to have to get the integers that we put in this bracket when multiplied are going to have to add up to 14x. So if we put a 3 in this bracket and a 1 in this bracket, and we're to factor this out, we would get 3 times 2x is 6x, and 4x times 1 is 4x, which would give us 10x, which isn't correct. So our two integers must be switched. So if we put a 1 here and a 3 in this bracket, we'll see that 4x times 3 will give us 12x, and 1 times 2x will give us 2x. So 12x plus 2x will give us 14x. Now we're going to set each factor equal to 0 and to solve for the variable, which is x in this case. So now that we have both our factors equal to 0, we're going to take each one and solve for x. So on our left side, we're going to minus 1 to both sides, which will give us 4x is equal to -1. To get x by itself, we'll divide by 4, and we'll see that x will equal -1/4. And then on our left side, we'll do the same, where we'll subtract 3 from both sides, which will give us 2x is equal to -3. And then to get x by itself, we'll divide each side by 2. And when we do so, we'll get x will equal -3/2. So we can take the time and plug these values back into our original equation, and if we do so, we'll get 0. So if we took time to do that, we'd see that both these values of x would make the statement true above. So our ordered pairs for this example problem would be -1/4 and -3/2. We just saw how to factor a quadratic equation. Now we can solve a quadratic equation by using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula can be seen below as -b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. So let's see if we can apply the quadratic equation to our example problem on the left. Our example problem says 2x squared plus 3x minus 1 is equal to 0. Let's label our integers. So as this equation is written, our 2 will be our a, our 3 will be our b, and our 1 will be our c. So our quadratic equation says take -b, so in this case we have +3, so we'll have a -3 plus minus b again, so b squared minus 4 times a, and our a is 2, times c, which is -1, all under the square root, divided by 2a, and our a again is 2. So we can try to simplify this so it's easier to understand. 3 squared will give us 9, minus 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times -1 will give us a value of -8, divided by 4. If we add our values inside the square root, we'll get 9 plus 8 will give us 17 divided by 4. Since 17 can't be simplified into a simpler form, we're going to take the positive and negative square root of 17. So if we do so, we'll have -3 plus the square root of 17 divided by 4, and -3 minus the square root of 17 divided by 4. Now we can plug both values into the original equation and see if we'll get 0. And if we do so, we'll see that both of these statements are true. So now let's look at an example where we can apply this to physics. So we have a problem that says a ball is thrown upward from a height of 20 meters. The height of the ball after the ball is released is given by the equation h equals -16x squared plus 16x plus 20. And they want us to know how long does it take the ball to reach a height of 8 feet. So we're trying to solve for time. So we can write, if we rewrite the equation, -16x squared plus 16x plus 20 equals h. And in this case, we're trying to find the time when the height is 8. So we can plug 8 into this equation. And we're going to try to solve using a quadratic equation. So we're going to have to get all our values on one side and make the other side equal to 0. So if we subtract 8 from both sides, we'll get -16x squared plus 16x plus 12 will equal 0. Now we can plug this into the quadratic formula. But first we might realize that these are all a factor of 4. So if we divided this equation by -4, which will give us 4x squared minus 4x minus 3 will equal 0. So we plug this into the quadratic equation, we will get 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is -3, all over 2a. So we can simplify this equation, and when we do so, our values underneath our square root will get 16 plus 48 all over 8. So if we add our values within our square root, we'll get square root of 64 divided by 8. And we know that if we take the square root of 64, we'll get 8. And now we can take positive and the negative values to get our two values for time. So we can take 4 plus 8 divided by 8, which will give us 12 over 8. Or if we simplify it even more, will give us 3 over 2. And then we can take 4 minus 8 divided by 8, which will give us negative 4 divided by 8. And since we know that time can't be a negative value, that the only value that makes sense in this case is that the time it takes for the ball to reach 8 feet will be 3 over 2 seconds, or 1.5 seconds.